Most women think men fear rejection, but the truth is men fear silence more. Silence from a woman is not just a lack of words. It is a psychological event. It is the collapse of the narrative he built about himself. When she chooses silence, she withdraws the mirror. She takes away the reflection of his desirability, his control, his ego, and suddenly he is left alone with himself. Carl Jung understood this dangerous terrain long before modern relationship coaches gave it a name. He saw obsession not as love but as shadow, the desperate attempt of the male ego to escape its own emptiness by clinging to the feminine. To Jung, the woman who chooses silence becomes an archetype. She transforms from flesh and bone into symbol and spirit. She becomes, in the man's unconscious, the lost piece of his soul, the anima he has not yet integrated. This is not ordinary romance. This is projection at the deepest level. A man does not obsess over a woman simply because she is beautiful, or kind, or distant. He obsesses because her silence awakens his unhealed parts. Her absence becomes a portal. Her detachment forces him to confront the void within, the space where his inner feminine has been exiled. And you can feel this in your own life, can't you? How many times have you seen it? The moment you stop responding, the moment you become still, the man who once felt indifferent begins to spiral. He sends messages. He reappears. He watches from afar. He tells himself stories about who you are, what you must be thinking, what he must do to regain control. But it's not control of you that he's chasing. It's control of his own projection. Carl Jung changed the way we understand human connection because he revealed what most people refuse to see, that relationships are rarely between two people. They are between two egos, two shadows, two sets of unspoken wounds. And the woman who chooses silence activates the man's most forbidden fears, that he is not enough without someone else to complete him, that he cannot validate his own worth, that he is still trapped in the trauma of abandonment. This is why the feminine becomes dangerous when she detaches, not because she is cruel, but because she removes the emotional anesthesia. She pulls back the soothing drug of attention, and the man is left with his raw self, his disowned vulnerability, his longing for the mother, the goddess, the anima, all collapsed into one silent woman who refuses to play the game. To understand this is to step into a new kind of power. But it is not the power of manipulation. It is the power of awareness, of knowing that your silence is not a weapon, but a mirror. It shows the man where he is spiritually incomplete. Some men will rise from this. They will face the discomfort. They will do the inner work that Jung called individuation, the process of integrating the shadow, healing the inner split, becoming whole. They will stop projecting their soul onto a woman and begin finding it within themselves. But most will not. Most will choose obsession over growth. They will tell themselves that you are the problem, that you are heartless, cold, unavailable. They will try to punish you with silence of their own. They will oscillate between idealizing you and resenting you, unable to find peace with either. And you, if you are not careful, will be tempted to ease their discomfort, to step back into the role of the emotional caretaker, to answer the text, to soften the no, to break your own silence in order to make his spiral stop. But the woman who understands her worth knows better. She knows that not every man is ready to meet the woman who chooses herself. She knows that not every man can withstand the alchemy of feminine detachment. She knows that some men will try to turn her into a fantasy to avoid facing their own soul. And so, she stays still. She allows the storm to pass through him. She lets him wrestle with his projections, his ego, his shadows. She becomes the catalyst for his transformation, or for his destruction. But she does not intervene. This is not cruelty, this is spiritual discipline. Because the woman who chases validation becomes a prisoner of it. The woman who fears being misunderstood will forever live in performance. But the woman who embraces the silence of her own becoming, she becomes untouchable. When a woman learns to stand in her own silence, she steps into a territory few dare to enter. She no longer feeds the endless loop of explanation, apology, or justification. She knows that silence is not emptiness, it is space. And in that space, the true self either rises or crumbles. Carl Jung taught that the unconscious is always projecting, always reaching for symbols to make sense of its inner chaos. For a man, the woman who walks away without closure becomes more than a memory. She becomes myth. He attaches to her not because she wronged him, but because she embodies the unresolved feminine within him, the anima figure he has exiled into the shadows. This obsession is not about her. It is about his refusal to meet the depths of his own vulnerability. It is about his hunger for the mother he never fully had, the goddess he cannot possess, the emotional sanctuary he believes he lost. When she steps away, when she chooses silence, she triggers the psychic wound of abandonment that lives in every unintegrated man. And yet most women have been conditioned to soften this impact, to respond, to reassure, to return, because culture has taught women that a man's comfort is their responsibility. But the woman who awakens to her own individuation knows this is a trap. She knows that stepping back into his narrative is not kindness. It is codependency, dressed as compassion. The Stoics whispered of this in their own way. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it." Jung extended this idea into the realm of the unconscious. He taught that what we call love is often projection, a mirror of the parts we refuse to see in ourselves. And when the object of that projection withdraws, the ego trembles. The man is left with his own reflection, unfiltered and raw. In modern psychology, this is called attachment trauma. In spiritual psychology, it is called soul hunger. But to Jung, it was always about individuation, the sacred process of becoming whole. The man who cannot tolerate a woman's silence is a man who has not yet faced his own depths. He mistakes her detachment for cruelty, when in truth, it is an invitation. But invitations to growth are rarely welcomed. They are resisted, resented, and rejected. A man would rather believe she is heartless than admit that his love was built on possession. He would rather spiral into obsession than ask why he cannot soothe his own emptiness. This is why silence is so powerful. It interrupts the ego's narrative. It breaks the loop of chasing and catching, losing and reclaiming. It forces a confrontation with the unconscious. And yet, for the woman, this path is not without cost. She too must endure the loneliness of being misunderstood. She must watch as the man projects his unresolved pain onto her, accusing her of being cold when she is simply clear. She must withstand the guilt that society has implanted in her, the lie that a woman's worth is measured by how much she gives, not how deeply she knows herself. But the woman who chooses silence does not abandon love. She abandons ego games. She refuses to participate in the cycle of mutual delusion. She knows that her role is not to complete a man, but to complete herself. And in doing so, she gives him the rarest gift of all, the chance to meet his own soul. Some men will rise to this challenge. They will stop chasing her and start confronting themselves. They will enter therapy, meditation, or spiritual practice. They will descend into shadow work, as Jung prescribed, peeling back the layers of ego to find the true self beneath. They will integrate the anima, no longer seeing women as objects of desire, but as mirrors of their own inner world. Others will not. They will stay trapped in the loop. They will search for another woman to project onto, another body to fill the void, another lover to distract them from the silence they cannot bear. And in doing so, they will repeat the pattern, never realizing that the real issue is not the woman who left, but the parts of themselves they refuse to reclaim. For the woman, this realization brings both sorrow and freedom. She mourns the men who could not meet her, but she no longer sacrifices herself to be understood. She no longer dilutes her depth to soothe their fears. She understands that detachment is not rejection. It is alignment with truth. To choose silence is to choose power, not power over, but power within. It is to trust that the right man will not fear your stillness. He will not mistake your mystery for malice. He will not call your boundaries a betrayal. He will meet you there, in the silence, in the unknown, in the place where real connection begins, not in ego, but in soul. There is a moment in every relationship where a woman stands at a silent crossroads. She knows she can speak, explain, and soothe, or she can choose stillness. The former maintains the illusion of control. The latter dissolves it. And when she chooses stillness, the man is left staring into the mirror of his own unfinished self. Carl Jung warned of this mirror long ago. He called it the confrontation with the shadow, the terrifying process of facing the parts of ourselves we have banished into darkness. For a man, the woman's silence becomes this confrontation. Her absence doesn't just leave a void in his life. It exposes the void within his psyche. Men are taught to pursue, to conquer, to resolve. They are trained to believe that if they try hard enough, speak cleverly enough, love intensely enough, they will get the woman to yield. But when she does not yield, when she chooses silence over explanation, distance over validation, something breaks open inside him. He feels powerless. And to the male ego, there is nothing more dangerous than powerlessness. This is why obsession begins. Obsession is not love. It is the mind's desperate attempt to close an open loop, to turn uncertainty into certainty, to transform rejection into redemption. But the woman who refuses to be possessed, who refuses to collapse into his narrative, becomes the ultimate psychological riddle. She becomes the symbol of everything he cannot control. His anima, the internal feminine he has ignored, suddenly projects onto her, and he confuses his spiritual hunger for romantic longing. He mistakes his need for inner integration with a need to win her back. But you cannot win back a woman who has chosen herself. You can only meet her where she is, or fall away. And this is where the transformation either begins or fails. Jung taught that the ego will resist dissolution at all costs. It will rage, bargain, blame, and spiral. It will label the woman cruel. It will call her names. It will accuse her of withholding love. But beneath this rage is grief. The grief of a man who has realized, perhaps for the first time, that his sense of self is built on unstable ground. He is not chasing the woman. He is chasing the part of his soul she reflects back to him. This is the sacred danger of the feminine. She does not just offer affection, she offers initiation. And not all men are ready to be initiated. Most are still addicted to validation. They confuse being chosen with being whole. They think love is about possession, not presence. The woman who knows this no longer plays small to protect a man's ego. She understands that her silence is not a punishment. It is a boundary woven from wisdom. She knows that when she stays silent, she is not abandoning love. She is inviting depth. She is inviting the man to meet himself in the emptiness, to wrestle with his shadows, to integrate his anima, instead of outsourcing his healing to her attention. But this invitation is brutal. The male psyche resists shadow work. It would rather keep the woman close and the unconscious far away. It would rather bind her with longing than face the terror of inner emptiness. So the obsession grows. It festers in unanswered messages, in social media stalking, in fantasies of what could have been. But none of this is about her. It is about the ego's refusal to die. And yet, in this collapse, there is also an opportunity. If the man is brave, he will stop externalizing his pain. He will stop blaming her for his suffering. He will stop chasing and start reflecting. He will ask the hardest questions. Why do I need her attention to feel worthy? What part of myself have I abandoned that I now expect her to rescue? Why does her silence terrify me more than her rejection? These are the questions that lead to awakening. These are the questions that Jung whispered beneath his teachings, the ones that dismantle the ego and birth the true self. But most men will not ask them. They will stay caught in the loop. They will look for another woman to soothe the wound, another obsession to distract from the silence. They will keep trying to replace the symbol instead of confronting the source. And the woman who understands this watches quietly. She does not intervene. She does not rescue. She knows that to reinsert herself into his ego drama is to delay his growth. So she remains still, not from cruelty, but from compassion at the deepest level. She trusts the process. She knows that silence is not absence, it is alchemy. It is the sacred space where the ego burns and the soul, if allowed, begins to rise. There is something haunting about a woman who no longer needs to be understood. She becomes a symbol the male psyche cannot fully grasp, and that is precisely why he cannot let her go. Her silence transforms her into what Carl Jung called an archetype, the eternal feminine, the mystery beyond comprehension. She becomes not just a woman in his memory, but an energy in his unconscious, an unresolved longing, a spiritual puzzle with no solution. Most men are not prepared for this level of encounter. They have been conditioned to believe that relationships are transactions, desire met with reciprocation, pursuit met with surrender. But the woman who chooses silence breaks this pattern. She does not negotiate with projection. She lets it collapse. In doing so, she reveals the cracks in his sense of self. Jung's work was clear. The psyche cannot become whole without death. Not a literal death, but the death of the false self, the persona, the ego mask. And for many men, the loss of a woman's attention feels like this death. It is not just romantic disappointment, it is existential. It is the realization that he has been chasing shadows, clinging to illusions, mistaking external possession for internal peace. This is why he obsesses, because obsession is safer than surrender. To obsess is to keep the mind busy. It is to stay in motion, circling the same thoughts, the same memories, the same regrets. It is a defense mechanism against stillness. Because in stillness, the truth emerges. He has been outsourcing his spiritual development onto her. He has been using her presence as a way to avoid meeting his own inner feminine. The anima, Jung taught, is not just a symbol of romance. It is the key to a man's soul. She represents creativity, intuition, feeling, and depth. But if a man refuses to integrate his anima, he will project her onto the women he desires. He will expect them to carry his emotional wholeness for him. And when they refuse, when they choose silence, he will experience this as betrayal. But it is not betrayal, it is initiation. Some women try to soften this. They fear being seen as cruel, so they explain themselves endlessly. They send long texts. They apologize for their distance. They make themselves smaller, so the man will not feel abandoned. But in doing so, they abandon themselves. The woman who chooses herself must be willing to carry the weight of being misunderstood. She must accept that some men will call her cold, heartless, manipulative. They will not see the depth of her silence. They will not understand that her detachment is not rejection. It is sovereignty. And yet, for the woman who has done her shadow work, this is no longer a burden. It is freedom. She no longer lives for the comfort of the male ego. She no longer fears the consequences of her own truth. She knows that her silence will filter out those who seek control from those who seek consciousness. The man who is ready will not chase her to fill his emptiness. He will use her silence as a mirror. He will descend into his own shadow, facing the parts of himself he has long avoided. He will realize that his obsession was never about her. It was about his own fragmentation. And this is where real transformation begins. Jung called it individuation, the sacred path of integrating the self, both light and dark. The man who chooses this path will stop trying to possess the woman who left. He will stop seeing her as a symbol of loss and start seeing her as a catalyst for growth. He will understand that her silence was not abandonment, but initiation into his own wholeness. But the cost of this realization is steep. It requires him to die to the persona, to let go of the story that a woman's attention equals his worth, to stop demanding that the feminine soothe his ego wounds and start nurturing his own anima within. This is not easy. Most will fail. They will return to old patterns, new obsessions, safer relationships where the woman does not challenge them to grow. They will settle for comfort over consciousness. But for the few who succeed, a new kind of love becomes possible, one that is not built on neediness or projection, but on wholeness. A love that is not about filling a void, but about sharing a path. And the woman who knows her worth, she is no longer interested in anything less. She does not chase the man who obsesses. She does not rescue him from his spiral. She knows that real connection can only happen when both people stand in their own center, complete, sovereign, awake. She becomes the embodiment of the sacred feminine, not the caretaker of the male ego, but the mirror of his soul. Some women spend years trying to avoid this role. They dim their light to keep a man close. They silence their intuition to make him comfortable. They soften their edges so he won't spiral into insecurity. But every time they do this, they betray themselves, and they betray the natural order of spiritual growth. Carl Jung revealed a truth most relationships cannot bear. Love is not about completion. It is about reflection. And reflection is dangerous because it exposes everything the ego is trying to hide. When a woman chooses silence, she withdraws the mirror. She no longer participates in the cycle of ego reinforcement. She no longer provides the constant reflection that says, "You are desirable. You are enough because I say so. You are whole because I approve of you." Her silence breaks the spell. The man is left alone. He is left with his projections, his wounds, his shadows. He cannot access her mystery anymore, not because she has disappeared, but because she has chosen to no longer perform emotional labor for him. She has chosen herself, and in that choice, she becomes untouchable. The Stoics spoke of this in different terms. Epictetus warned that the only true control we have is over our own mind, our own choices, our own reactions. But most men are still conditioned to believe that women are extensions of their emotional world. They see women as validators of their worth, regulators of their anxiety, balm for their unresolved mother wounds. So when the woman refuses this role, when she steps back into silence, the man feels not just rejected, he feels erased. It is as if the story he has been telling himself about love, about masculinity, about control, has collapsed. And rather than face this collapse, he turns to obsession. He scrolls through old messages. He rewatches shared moments in his mind. He reinterprets every word she ever said, hoping to find the key to her silence. He convinces himself that if he can understand why she left, he can regain control. But obsession is the ego's way of avoiding transformation. Real growth requires letting go of the narrative. It requires surrender. It requires the death of the belief that anyone outside of you can complete you. Jung called this the path of wholeness, the journey into the unconscious where the anima, the inner feminine, is not projected outward but welcomed inward. For the man who is brave enough, the woman's silence becomes sacred. It becomes the catalyst for individuation. He stops trying to win her back and starts asking the deeper questions. Who am I without her attention? Why have I given her the responsibility of managing my self-worth? What part of myself have I refused to love, forcing her to carry that weight for me? These questions are terrifying because they dismantle the ego. They force a reckoning with the true self. And yet, they are the only path to real love. The kind of love that is not about need, but about conscious union. But let's speak honestly. Most will not take this path. They will search for a new woman to project onto, a new source of validation, a new way to avoid themselves. They will call the first woman cruel, cold, emotionally unavailable. They will say she withheld love when in truth, she withheld codependency. And the woman? She must stand strong in this knowing. It is not her job to rescue the man from his own shadows. It is not her role to provide endless reassurance to a psyche unwilling to grow. She is not responsible for managing his spiritual evolution. Her silence is not punishment. It is protection of herself, of her energy, of her sovereignty. She knows that love without consciousness becomes addiction. She knows that when she silences herself to keep a man from spiraling, she becomes complicit in his stagnation. So she chooses the harder path. She chooses to walk away without explanation, knowing that her absence will either break him or wake him. This is the sacred responsibility of the awakened woman. She does not exist to soothe the male ego. She exists to embody the feminine principle of mystery, detachment, and spiritual reflection. She knows that some men will never understand her silence. They will resent her for it. They will accuse her of cruelty when she is simply living her truth. But the man who is ready, the man who is willing to do the shadow work, will thank her one day. Perhaps not aloud, but in his soul, because her silence forced him to find himself. And in this finding, both are freed. Freedom, however, is not what most people truly want. They say they crave it, but when it comes, it terrifies them. Freedom demands responsibility. It requires each soul to stand alone, to stop outsourcing its wounds onto someone else's affection. That is why most men chase women not out of love, but out of the fear of meeting themselves in solitude. Carl Jung changed the landscape of human psychology by showing us that love, especially the love between man and woman, is often a projection of the unconscious. He taught that men do not simply fall in love with women, they fall in love with the parts of themselves they have exiled. The feminine within, the anima, the mystery. But what happens when the woman refuses to carry that projection anymore? She becomes dangerous. She becomes the spiritual mirror of his emptiness. Her silence is not a weapon. It is a sacred refusal to be used as a distraction from his inner work. She no longer provides the emotional scaffolding that props up his fragile sense of self. She no longer volunteers her attention as a substitute for his shadow integration. And in this detachment, she becomes something otherworldly. Her absence takes on the weight of myth. She is no longer just a woman. She becomes an initiation. A rite of passage the male psyche cannot bypass. He may search for her in other women, but it will not work. The projection is now too large, the void too vast. He cannot replicate the alchemy she triggered by walking away. This is why obsession takes root. Not because he wants her, but because he wants relief from the questions her silence provokes. Who am I without her validation? Why does her detachment hurt more than rejection? Why do I feel abandoned by the divine when a single woman chooses not to engage? These are spiritual questions, not romantic ones. And yet most men mistake them for heartbreak. The woman who knows herself sees this clearly. She watches as he spirals, as he replays old conversations, as he tries to negotiate with her silence. But she does not step back in. She does not offer comfort. She lets him sit with the ache, because she knows that the ache is sacred. It is the alchemical fire where the ego burns. The Stoics prepared for this. Marcus Aurelius wrote about the beauty of discomfort, the necessity of standing alone in the face of life's chaos. Seneca whispered of detachment, of letting go of what you cannot control. Jung added to this wisdom by showing how deeply these lessons apply to love, to romance, to the painful but necessary death of projections. When a woman chooses silence, she disrupts the male ego's story. She is no longer the muse, the nurturer, the emotional caretaker. She becomes the dark goddess, the embodiment of the unknown, the portal to shadow work, the catalyst for growth or collapse. Most men will not see this clearly. They will fight the narrative. They will accuse her of cruelty, of manipulation, of playing games. But the awakened woman knows better. She understands that the real game is the one the ego plays with itself, the game of avoidance, of chasing symbols instead of integrating wounds. And so she stays silent, not because she is cold, but because she has evolved beyond the need to be understood by those who are not ready. She chooses her own peace over his comfort. She chooses her own wholeness over his projections. The man who rises to meet this moment will transform. He will enter the depths of his unconscious. He will stop seeking her as the solution and start seeking his own anima. He will reclaim the parts of himself he has placed onto her shoulders. And when this happens, something rare occurs. The man no longer sees her silence as punishment. He sees it as permission to grow, to heal, to become sovereign. This is not the ending most men imagine when they first feel obsession take hold, but it is the only ending that leads to true freedom. The woman who knows her worth does not chase. She does not plead to be understood. She does not negotiate with obsession or shrink to fit someone else's comfort zone. She chooses quietly, powerfully, completely. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase. She chooses.